The Tigers lose the series to Houston 2-1, and the Pistons have hired renowned shooting coach Fred Vinson. What does that mean for the players on the team and for Monty's future moving forward? We'll break all that down on today's show.
And there's the snap. Blitz comes. Mayfield back. Loads. Throws. Picked up by the Lions. Intercepted by the Lions. Intercepted by the Lions. Derek Barnes. Derek Barnes. Derek Barnes.
Reggie Miller. And it's blocked again. What a block. Lead pass in for Larkin. In space for Raymond. And he scores! Lucas Raymond!
Welcome back to Detroit Sports Talk. Happy Monday. Hope you guys had a good weekend. Today's date is Monday, June 17th, 2024, and I am your host, Bobby Buckets. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to talk some Detroit sports today. Be sure to like the show, subscribe to the channel, comment your thoughts on today's topics, and follow me on Twitter at Bobby Buckets. Updates across the sports world. Both of our NBA and NHL finals are at a 3-1 series. NBA Game 5 is tonight in Boston as they try to finish off Dallas to win the championship back in Boston tonight. Things are looking pretty good in their favor to think that they can pull it out. But as always, rooting against Boston. Hope they're the first team to blow a 3-0 lead. NHL Game 5 is tomorrow night as Florida tries to best Edmonton. Same kind of scenario, traveling back to the Florida Panthers arena as they try to finish off the Edmonton Oilers in 5 games. Bryson DeChambeau, U.S. Open winner from this past weekend. It was cool seeing him celebrate in the crowd, bringing the trophy through, letting everybody touch it, doing his interviews. Watch this. And he started running through the crowds. And then coming up next week, we have the NBA draft that starts next Wednesday with round 1, Thursday, round 2, and then the NHL draft starts after that, Friday and Saturday of next weekend. So we should have NBA and NHL finals wrapping up soon, and then in return, NBA and NHL draft coming next week. So let's go ahead and dive into our first segment. First segment today is going to be reacting to this weekend's Tigers series loss to the Houston Astros. So game 1, Tigers lost 4-0. It was scoreless up until the 6th inning, as games usually go with Scooble throwing. Scoobs threw 6 and 1 out, 6.1 innings. He gave up 4 earned runs in the 6th inning alone. That's where all the runs came from. He gave up, I want to say it was 6 hits. He had 1 walk, 2 strikeouts. He now has a 2.2 ERA and has an 8-2 record. So despite getting his second loss of the season, this dude is still dealing. He got no run support, unfortunately. But ERA rose just a little bit from giving up 4 runs in 1 inning. Still has a great record. Still one of the best pitchers in MLB right now. But, of course, offense was not good again. They had 5 total hits, and that came from Riley, Gio, Justin Henry Malloy, and 2 came from Colt Keith. They were 0 for 2 with runners in scoring position, so barely had any opportunities that they created for themselves. Which wasn't a great game altogether. Game 2 was the complete opposite, where the Tigers won 13-5. So this is the 3rd time this year that they have scored 13 or more runs, and go figure, they are 3-0 in those games. Jack Flaherty was on the mound. He continues to deal. He continues to be a great signing. He threw 5 innings, gave up 3 hits, no runs. He had 1 walk and 6 strikeouts. So generating a lot of whiffs, Flaherty is. He's 4 for 4 on the year now and just continues to pitch really well. So I'm still on the bandwagon of trade him while he's good. If you're not going to extend him this summer, don't lose him for nothing. Trade him at the deadline, get another bat, maybe a shortstop, maybe a first baseman, somebody who can also hit. So I'm still on the team. Trade Jack Flaherty at the trade deadline. The Tigers scored 10 runs in the first 3 innings. So after the bottom of the 3rd, the score was 10-0. They gave up all their 5 runs in the bottom of the 7th. Perez, Riley Green, and Colt Keith all had 4 hits. Vierling and Canna each had 2, and Carson Kelly had 3. Green with a 6 RBI game. The Detroit Tigers Twitter account was promoting voting for him for the All-Star game during this game, because that is your star player in Detroit right now, especially if Torkelson cannot get back on track. But Riley is on pace for like a 30 home run season. I forget what the RBIs were at, but Riley Green is your star player in Detroit right now. And Tarek Skubal is going to be your star player as a pitcher. Tigers were 5-15 with runners in scoring position. Houston was 3 of 14, so had more opportunities and converted on those opportunities as well. Weird when that happens. You score 13 runs at the same time. Game 3 was back on our, you know what I'm saying? Tigers lost 4-1 again. Back to normal with the lack of offense, but anytime that Kenta Maeda throws, you're in for who knows what. He threw 5 innings, gave up 5 hits, 4 runs, 2 walks, and had 1 strikeout. This continues to be the worst signing of the offseason. He moves to 2-3 and has an ERA above 6. I was trying to look, but couldn't figure out how to do it. In terms of, I think he's up to like 50, maybe 49 innings pitched. It's one of the worst ERAs in baseball for somebody who falls within that number of innings pitched. So not only has he been the worst pitcher on the Tigers, he's the worst starter on the Tigers, and he's one of the worst pitchers in the entire league. The Astros only had 5 hits. All came from when Kenta Maeda was throwing. They didn't get a hit the rest of the game. Tigers, though, only had 3. It came from Perez, Canna, and Ibanez. Tigers were 0-3 with runners in scoring position, and Houston was 2 of 3. So both had the limited opportunities. Houston capitalized. Detroit did not. So the Tigers are now 34-37. They were 31-30 2 weeks ago, so they are 3-7 in their last 10 games. Not great for a team that's looking to try and itch into the postseason. You are getting further and further away from being able to do that, which means you probably need to be sellers at the deadline. Move on from Jack Flaherty and whoever else that you can get assets for. Coming up, they have a 3-game series against Atlanta. Atlanta is 38-31, so we're playing a better team in Atlanta Monday through Wednesday. They're going to have Thursday off, and then they have a 3-game home series against the White Sox, one of the worst teams in the league at 19-54. So what is best case scenario for Detroit this week? I'm going to say 4-2. Where you can steal one of those games against Atlanta, and you need to beat the White Sox all 3 times at home. So 4-2 is going to be my guess for their record this week. What do you guys say? Leave your record in the comments below, or let me know over on Twitter. How many games is Detroit winning this week in their 6 games against Atlanta and the White Sox? Second topic that we're going to discuss was a huge hire made by the Detroit Pistons in Trajan Langdon as he continues to bring in new staff members I think we're about 2.5, 3 weeks into his tenure. Trajan Langdon brings in Fred Vinson from the New Orleans Pelicans. He is a well-renowned shooting coach, just a shooting coach. He's not one of the guys that sits in the front row on the sidelines, making scheme decisions, making decisions on who to attack on defense, making rotation decisions. He's not somebody whose expertise is in the X's and O's, but it's in the practice gym. It's in, it's after a bad loss at 12 in the morning when Cade wants to get more shots up after the game. He's going to stay there and he's going to shoot with them. So Fred Vinson was with the New Orleans for 14 years. And Trajan is essentially bringing him from New Orleans to Detroit with him. The big reason why Fred Vinson is such a well-renowned shooting coach is because of the results that he has produced with players that he has worked with. So, for example, the Anthony Davis trade that sent the New Orleans Pelicans Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball and lots of picks in return. Let's look at Brandon Ingram as Lonzo Ball as examples from when they went from LA to New Orleans. So Brandon Ingram spent 3 years in LA. He averaged 2 threes per game, so was not a shooter. Anybody who shoots 2 threes per game is not, you don't have the volume to be called a shooter, but in those 3 years, he shot 29% from 3, 39%, and then 33%, so kind of all over the place. And then when he moves to New Orleans, his first 2 years in New Orleans, working with and under Fred Vinson, his shots per game jumped from 2 to 6. Anyone who shoots 6 3-point attempts per game, that's a volume shooter. That's somebody you need to guard and respect out on the 3-point line. Not only did he shoot 6 or more threes per game, he also shot 39% and 38%. So he's a volume 3-point shooter who shoots at a rate of just under 40%. That's an above average volume 3-point shooter. That's why BI turned into a most improved player candidate. Did he win it? He might have won it in that first year in New Orleans, honestly. So that's why he's recognized as that. That's also why he's recognized as a trade target for Detroit. It's been reported that New Orleans does not want to pay Brandon Ingram a max contract, which would be upwards of $50 million per year. That's looking at like a 4-year, $200 million raise that Brandon Ingram is looking for after he has 1 more year left on his deal currently. So if New Orleans doesn't want to pay it, would Detroit, would another team who trades for him want to give him that kind of an extension that he's seeking? He probably will not get $50 million, given it feels quite rich. But Brandon Ingram's 3-point attempts have fallen consistently since his first 2 years in New Orleans. I think he was shooting in between 3 and 4 the last 2 years. So I'm not entirely sure why his 3-point attempts have dropped. But if he were to come to Detroit and play with a point guard like Cade, who can generate open looks and kick it out to wing spot ups, I would think Brandon Ingram would get back to being a 6+ threes per game shooter if they decide to pay him. But Brandon Ingram, looking at his percentages from LA to New Orleans, that's a big, it's evidence that Fred Vinson knows what he's talking about. Lonzo Ball, I think even more so. So in LA, the 2 years that Lonzo was in LA, he shot 31% from 3 on 5 attempts per game. If you're shooting 5 attempts per game, you're recognized as a shooter. Shooting 31%, I'm not going to close out on you so hard because I want you to shoot a 3-point attempt if you're only shooting 31% from 3. Now, he spent 2 years in New Orleans, and in those 2 years, he shot 38% from 3, both of those years, and they were on 6 attempts per game and then 8 attempts per game. So 8 attempts per game at 38% from 3. I would love if Cade could get to that. Cade shot 36% from 3. I'm not entirely sure how many attempts. I know it wasn't 8, though. So he instantly gets to New Orleans. His 3-point percentage skyrockets, and so do his attempts. After New Orleans, when he gets moved to Chicago, prior to getting hurt, and Lonzo Ball has not seen the court since 2022, maybe even 2021, but the last time that he played in Chicago, he was shooting 42% on 7 attempts per game. So Fred Vinson making his impact on Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball, turning them into sharpshooters and volume sharpshooters at that when they're getting 6, 7, 8 3-point attempts per game. So just a fantastic hire. It's proven that he is turning players into threats from beyond the 3-point line. Those are only 2 examples, but you can go ahead and look at Herb Jones. You could look at Najee Marshall. You could look at Jose Alvarado as, 2 UDFAs that they got on, that they signed and turned into shooters as well. So the Fred Vinson hire, I just think is huge in terms of, certain players like Cade getting to a 40% three-point shooter. Ivy has been 33, 34. We need him in that 38, 37 range. Asar was 18%. Can we get him to – if Asar could be a 30% three-point shooter, that would be huge for his game. Honestly, get him to a decent three-point shooter from the corner, and it's going to open up his game a ton. So it's such a good hire for the players on the roster and the development that's needed to turn them into better NBA players. But the biggest thing that I think is going around Pistons Twitter or just on the internet basically is about what does this mean for Monty Williams? So Fred Vinson got his first NBA job joining New Orleans since he's been there for 14 years. When he did join New Orleans, it's because Monty Williams was the head coach then. So he joined Monty Williams' staff in New Orleans. That's how he got his start. So maybe there's a connection there to where he is joining this staff knowing that it's going to be Monty Williams as the coach. Woj's tweet also described it as joining Monty Williams' staff, which technically to this point it is true, but we do not know if this was a Trajan hire or a Monty hire. Frankly, because he's coming from New Orleans, it makes me think it's a Trajan hire. And the fact that a shooting coach can fit on any coaching staff. It doesn't matter if it's Monty's staff or somebody new. If all he's coming in there is to help players shoot better and work on their form, it doesn't matter who the head coach is. He can fit on any staff. There also was a report that Mark Stein reported a source was speculating that it was likely that Monty is going to stay. Now, speculation is not a true factual report, so there's not really much to go along with this other than people are thinking if you're bringing in another assistant coach to join your coaching staff, that it must mean that Monty is staying. But frankly, it has been a very weird situation where Omari Sankofa and James Edwards III both said right away when Fred Vinson was hired that it may not mean anything about Monty's tenure in Detroit. But frankly, we've heard nothing from the organization directly. The beat reporters still don't know for sure that Monty is staying. We haven't had a Trajan press conference yet to introduce him to answer questions in front of the media, so the media can finally start asking him what the deal is with Monty. We've been told that they are evaluating the coaching staff. Mark Stein and James Edwards III both reported that, frankly, almost like 2 weeks ago, as soon as Trajan was announced. And we haven't heard anything. Nothing from the organization that has said they're moving on from Monty or they're keeping Monty. So frankly, the fan base is kind of just in limbo. But with every day we get closer to the NBA draft, we get closer to free agency, you probably want a head coach in place before all of that happens. So based on the coaching carousel that is happening right now, LA doesn't have a coach. Cleveland doesn't have a coach. It's almost like people are waiting for that LA coach to get hired for that domino to fall to see what the rest of everything else is going to bring. But I mean, we've got 9 days now, 8 days until the NBA draft. So you sure hope that you would have those players or those pieces in place. You know, if Monty's your guy, then you probably want his opinion on the NBA draft. But if he's not your guy, why hasn't he been moved on from yet? If he is your guy, why haven't we heard that he's the guy yet? So just kind of weird that we haven't gotten clarification or closure either way. And so hopefully at some point this week, we will get that. So what are your thoughts? What is your conspiracy theory maybe as to why the fan base is being left in limbo right now? When do you guys think we'll hear about the future of Monty Williams? Let me know in the comments below or over on Twitter. And that's it for this episode of Detroit Sports Talk. Be sure to like the show, subscribe to the channel, comment below to share your thoughts on today's topics, and be sure to follow me on Twitter at Bobby Buckets. Thanks again for taking the time to tune in, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.